Hey everyone, it's Samuel. Just wanted to give a quick announcement before we got into the episode. Your feedback has been so awesome since the release of this information earlier in the week, since Mike and I recorded this episode. We just wanted to say thank you for the reaction to the small amount of information that we released about Khariq. And if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, on our Patreon, you can find available for everyone a list of the 5 things which we're going to discuss here today, which set Khariq apart as a setting. And also for our patrons, we have a list of magic items which use the special Cordorian crystals, which you'll hear a little bit about in today's episode as well. Again, just thank you so much for your feedback, and we love this little family that Plot Hooks is becoming, and we just thank you all so much. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hey everyone, it's Samuel.
And I'm Mike.
And welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons & Dragons.
Today, introducing our world of Khariq.
In the wilds, the banshee.
And in the tavern, what would you do if fiends started invading your town?
All right, let's go.
All right.
Good to have you with us again, Mike.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, excited to talk about our world of Khariq today. If you are one of our patrons or follow us on social media, you've seen that this week some of our world building information, kind of an introduction to the world, was released there on our Patreon, and we're going to go over some of that information today.
After about a year or more of already being in this world, it's great to share it with other people.
It is, absolutely. Before we get into that, just a couple announcements to get out of the way. Follow us on all our aforementioned social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Subscribe to us on YouTube if that tickles your fancy. Remember our standing giveaway when we hit 250 followers on Twitter. We'll be giving away a D&D 5th edition book to a lucky follower. And of course, if you support us on Patreon, not only will you help make our show better each and every week, but you also get all this information about our world of Khariq along with other perks. Check us out and you'll see all the information there on our Patreon. All right, the world of Khariq. Khariq was a world that I created for a campaign a little over a year ago now, and it was inspired by a couple of different things, but primarily it was inspired by the desire to eliminate racism in my world. Obviously, that's something that we battle in this world tremendously, especially here in the United States where we're at. And I wanted to create a space where the various sapient races of Dungeons and Dragons interacted with harmony instead of with animosity, where the dwarves didn't hate the elves, where the drow weren't discriminated against, where they weren't evil, where different people weren't looked down on because of who they are. But in order to create a realistic world where that's actually realistic, we had to create certain aspects of the world to actually facilitate this happening. And so some of that we want to share with you a little bit today. Just as an introduction, Khariq is a vast land that's marked by both the diversity of its people and its wilderness. It's very full of vibrant wilderness, and the various races are vibrant as well. The main races in this world are humans, elves, dwarves, gnomes, halflings, tieflings, dragonborn, and orcs. And elves also includes dark elves as well. And they all live amongst each other in harmony across the various cities and villages scattered across the expansive landscape in this singular continent that makes up this world, combined with its surrounding islands. There's been no major war or anything in this world for over 1,000 years. But despite the peace that exists in Khariq between its citizens, their minds are anything but at rest. The government, called the High Council, was established at the dawn of the Second Age at the end of the last major war, but it has always been distant and secretive and has become increasingly more so. They now rule from a forbidden island, the island of High Khariq, and the so-called Khariq High Council leads via proxies and masked law mages that patrol. It's tremendously secretive and creates a tremendous amount of suspicion. And that generates the conflict in this world. It's not between the people, it's not between the kingdoms, it's between the citizens and the government. And the populace was content with this arrangement for a very long while because they did a good job, this government did, of maintaining calm and maintaining peace. But rumors of suspicious events have cropped up and are always briskly swept under the proverbial rug. Inhabitants have been encountering and being slain by fell creatures alarmingly close to the main roads in the cities, and a tremendous lack of transparency in the judicial system has caused increasing concern. And really, anxiety, pessimism, suspicion, those emotions mark the subject's interactions with this mysterious government, and doubts keep creeping ever deeper into the hearts of the citizenry. And the way that this world is set is you are essentially dropped into a situation that seems to stand almost on the edge of a cliff, and it would only take a little shove for everything to just kind of tumble over the edge. So with all that being said, there are 5 things which we generated which kind of set Khariq apart as a setting. I mentioned a little bit of it already there in the introduction. You've got racial harmony. You've got the conflict generated between the government and the people. There's actually limited access to other planes in this setting, and that fact is actually changing due to some things that the High Council is doing behind the scenes. And all of this creates a very film noir style setting where there's all this pessimism and menace and distrust of the rulers as the peoples of Khariq unite together against this particular government. And finally, the last thing that we'll go over here that sets the setting apart is a particular type of crystal, which you can refer to as perpetual motion crystals. And we'll get into all of that as we go through these 5 things today. So the first is just racial harmony.
Mm-hmm. I will say that when we were building our characters to play in your world the first time, this was something that took me, someone who's read a lot of the different types of adventurers and things. It took me a while to wrap my head around the fact that regardless of whatever character I chose, I would be able to walk into anywhere and not have an issue.
Yeah, exactly.
That took a long time to adjust.
Yeah, it's quite abnormal within real life as well as in Dungeons and Dragons. But we just wanted to create that so we could have this space where there was no racism. And of course, there's bad people in Khariq. There's people who do discriminate. But it's not something that is societally acceptable, and it's not something that's widespread. There are definitely areas where orcs congregate, and the populace is mostly orcs, or the populace is mostly elves. But it's not restricted. And really that goes back to the history of the world, where after countless years of this existing, of racism existing, of wars between various Khariq clan states that were predominantly divided along racial lines, there was an elf named Talos the Radiant, who over time wished to escape these conflicts. And Talos invited all who wished to escape these conflicts to his town that he ruled, simply called the Vale, a town that was nestled in the southern fork of the Bragadian Mountains. And over the next century, more and more people sought out this city from across the continent, and Talos' example became very widely respected. That area quickly became known as it is today in the setting as Talos' Vale. And as time passed, the citizenry just grew sicker and sicker of the war and the discrimination that existed along these racial lines. And to put a long story short, over time, this mentality just faded through the tremendous amount of work that Talos and other people put in to the various systems. And people just slowly, over centuries, slowly moved away from this discrimination and created this racial harmony where people were no longer defined by who they were, and they began to be defined by where they lived, by their particular culture, and there was no discrimination based on race. And there's a lot more information in the history of the world which plays into exactly how this happened and exactly why it happened. But again, this is just the first of these 5 things that sets Khariq apart, because we wanted to create this space of racial harmony. And as you guys have been playing in the world for over a year now, y'all guys have experienced this, haven't you?
We have, and I mean, just being able to walk into any scenario as players and being based more on our actions or where we're from, even with my new character that I'm making that doesn't fall into this normal category of what's normal in the world. There was no question about my character walking around. Yeah. They just accepted that I was someone they've never seen before, and that was okay. You know, and to play that, and it's a nice change of pace, and it relieves a lot of the inner party tension that you almost feel obligated to play off of. Yeah. That's a great relief off of that.
Yeah, you actually get to have things based on who you are and not who people suppose you to be. And that's what we wanted to create here. But of course, there has to be conflict. There has to be conflict in a world. And the second thing which sets Khariq apart is the conflict in the setting is very much centered around the united races against this government. Now, the government, the High Council, is not strictly oppressive. They have existed for over 1,000 years. They're just extraordinarily secretive, and things have begun to happen which have caused the citizenry to lose faith in their government. And because of the secretive nature of their government, they have no answers. And things keep being swept under the rug. The justice system has become very non-transparent. And there's so much that's going on that really plays up this conflict between the government and the people that really just stands on this knife edge. That actually was the centerpiece of the entire first campaign that we played in this world, where you guys were dropped into this world and you discovered things about the government that kind of set all these balls in motion. And it quickly became this very overt and not behind the scenes conflict anymore.
No, not at all. It certainly got very exciting very quickly. I'll remember that. Playing into my character at the time, I had not had interaction with the government. Me personally,
as a hermit character, as the hermit,
that made me trying to also understand the world and my character understand the world. It was even more chaotic for my character, who was like, why are these people in charge, and why are they telling me what to do, and why are things falling apart? I don't know what's going on.
And all of this really plays into the third thing that makes Khariq unique, is the really film noir style setting. This is a world where the distrust of the government has led to so much anxiety, pessimism, suspicion of the authorities amidst the populace. The secretive nature of their rulers, coupled with all these rising occurrences such as people encountering fell creatures that they've never encountered before, such as the lack of transparency, all these different things create this very suspicious and menacing environment which plays very nicely into film noir tropes.
Yes. Well, and it that pessimism and anxiety clashes directly with your racial harmony when everyone's okay with each other, but now they can't trust this outside force.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's about that uniting of everyone together against that governmental structure. It plays very nicely into espionage tropes as well within a film noir type setting. We mentioned it a little bit already in passing, but the fourth thing that sets Khariq apart is for a very long time, almost the entire recorded history of the world, there was very limited access to other planes. Now, Dungeons and Dragons is a world built with a multiverse. It's
Correct.
built with elemental planes and the ethereal plane and the astral plane and the outer planes and all these different places which impact the prime material plane. But long ago, after a war in Khariq, these 7 runic structures were created that severely limited access from other planes into the prime material. It kind of insulated the prime material away from the other planes. But one thing that this secretive government has been doing is undoing these seals. They've been, for their own nefarious purposes, allowing more access between the planes. And that's been causing these creatures, which the populace has never seen before, suddenly appearing in all these different spaces. This very insulated populace is all of a sudden interacting with these things that they've never seen before. These people have heard of in legends of things like devils and demons and other sort of nefarious entities, but they've never interacted with them. And so that adds a whole new element of storytelling to the film noir trope, where again you have this united people that is so distrusting of the government, and now all these other things are happening which they don't understand and they're trying to figure out, and their government isn't giving them any answers. And it just creates this very tense situation which has been very ripe for great narratives.
And I imagine having such limited access to planes, you also have limited access to the helpful races from other planes that could have helped people deal with what's going on with this government and everything like that. But because of the sealed away, nothing changed, nothing happened over these thousands of years.
Yeah. And that really helps set up this current conflict, where it is a setting with racial harmony against a government. There has been no demonic incursions of any significant level.
Well, and as we're sharing this with other people as a world for them to build in, that sets up for similar to ones we've run in with you, where the planes start opening as these sigils that lock the planes were released. That allows for narrative as, one of those seals breaks and the surrounding area is suddenly invaded from this realm or that realm, and it allowed you to lead us on adventures where normally there's not a plane to the lava children in the world and everything like that, and today there is.
It creates some very interesting storytelling opportunities.
Definitely.
Finally, there's the perpetual motion crystals. In the southeastern portion of Khariq, there's a predominantly underground metropolis. It's the biggest city in Khariq. It's primarily a drow city. It's called Credorian Outpost. And there they mine veins of this deep red crystal far beneath the Sarada Mountains. And this substance has innate magical properties which allow it to both absorb and subsequently reflect pulses of arcane energy. And scholars and tinkerers have been able to craft contrivances using 2 of these crystals, where once magic is introduced to the system, it creates a loop of perpetual motion where arcane energy constantly is absorbed and reflected back and forth between these two crystals. And while this arcane technology is not widely available yet in this world, these devices have been used in creating rudimentary appliances which can generate thrust for ships or carts, as well as provide power for many other contraptions. These particular crystals create some of the new magical items from Khariq. It creates an interesting twist, almost like if you chose in your particular setting to add in gunpowder and guns.
Gotcha.
It just creates this interesting twist on the very arcane, magic-heavy world of D&D. But those 5 things are the twists which kind of set Khariq apart from your typical Dungeons and Dragons high fantasy setting. It very much still is that. It's still high fantasy. It still has impact from deities and a huge level of the arcane, but just these elements of racial harmony, of the conflict being between the government and the people, the film noir tropes, the limited access to the other planes for so long that's now being released, and these perpetual motion crystals just creates this really unique setting which is fun to tell stories in.
It's definitely been one of the most enjoyable settings that I've ever played in.
Yeah. And we're really excited to keep sharing more and more information about it. And we'd love your input. Please, as always, comment on our particular videos. Comment on this information on our Patreon. Send us emails at our email at plothookspodcast@gmail.com. Interact with us on social media. We'd love for you to help continue to build this world and impact it as we keep releasing more and more of our world building information about this setting. Well, without further ado, I guess let's head into the Kraken Wilds.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Back out here in the wilds.
Did you hear something?
I sure hope not. At least, I hope I didn't hear a scream or anything. Today, we're talking a little bit about banshees. Banshees are ghost-like entities of former elves. Typically, in D&D settings, they're females, but in Khariq, I don't restrict it to that. It's to any particular elf that passes away. But these creatures, when they were alive, were strikingly gorgeous people, completely contrasted to the absolute monstrosity that they are today. Absolutely beautiful. But instead of taking advantage of this gift of beauty, of taking this gift and using it for good, these elves instead use their looks to take advantage of others, to manipulate, to control, dominate, violate, and corrupt others. And because they used their beauty, their attractiveness for such nefarious purposes, they were afflicted with the so-called Banshee's curse. And this happens uniquely while they're still living. And as time passes, they keep descending further and further into a state of hating the living, of being unable to enjoy life at all. And when they ultimately pass away, their transformation is complete, and their spirit is morphed into an undead remnant, driven by a complete hatred of life. And these disgustingly horrifying ghost-like entities begin to just sense life and try to basically eradicate it wherever they can find it. They have a feature called Detect Life, where they can actually sense the rough location of any living beings within 5 miles of them.
I feel like last time I was here, we were also dealing with creatures
Yeah.
that hated life and,
Yes.
and wanted to eradicate it.
Actually, we're in the middle of a streak of undead creatures because not only, as you mentioned, do we handle vampires in episode 10, but in episode 11 we went over Death Knights, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're on a little bit of an undead streak right now. But banshees are challenge rating for creatures. You can find them on page 23 of the Monster Manual. And they are incredibly interesting creatures to tell a story through. In Khariq specifically, due to certain events in the past, there are some banshees that are found in the Bragadian Mountains, especially around the pass of Celeborn, where you guys actually fought one while they were there.
Oh.
One of the things that makes them very interesting for storytelling is their ability to start an encounter by surprise using their wail ability, which is an ability they can use once a day, which sends out a mournful, extremely unsettling wail that causes all creatures within 30 feet to make a DC 13 Constitution saving throw. And if they fail it, they automatically drop to 0 hit points. They automatically start making death saving throws.
Oh,
and
jeez.
And even if they succeed, they take 3d6 psychic damage. But that is an amazing way of starting an encounter where your party is just camping at night, and this entity detects them from 5 miles away and suddenly starts stalking them, trying to figure out, because they don't know the exact location, they just know the rough location, and they eventually track down the party and surprise the party with that particular wail, and all of a sudden they're having to fight this entity down a couple of party members, trying to balance healing combined with fighting this creature, which is still has the ability to frighten them, still has the ability to deal necrotic damage with their corrupting touch spell attack, have to deal with the fact that they're immune to many different conditions like charmed or frightened. They're immune from acid damage and fire damage.
And a great thing for building encounters as a DM with this creature is the incorporeal movement ability, which allows a banshee to move through solid creatures and objects to great effect through walls and minor pieces of terrain.
Yeah, exactly.
They can't just pass through a mountain, but that can still cause some great surprise if you're not expecting it.
Yeah, whenever you guys encountered them in the Bragadian Mountains, you guys saw it from a distance and huddled inside of a particular rock formation where you thought it had to come from only one area and readied actions, and then it just wafted through from behind you, and suddenly initiative was rolled, and it made for a really spooky and scary encounter, and banshees are great for that.
I felt like that encounter, though, very quickly turned into a shoot things at a distance because someone used turn undead and caused it to flee.
They are still vulnerable to the turn undead being an undead creature. And
however, if we hadn't had that ability, that would have been a very different fight.
Yeah. The last thing we'll mention about banshees is they're actually an interesting creature to get loot from, not because they have loot on their person necessarily, but one of the features that they have is called beauty hoarders, where essentially the same self-absorbed, vain aspect that they had, the obsession with beauty that they had in life, continues through their undead form. And they, while they have no more beauty in and of themselves, they covet beautiful objects, which they will gather together. And your party can actually find things like jewelry or other beautiful objects, which can actually be great loot for a party to find, which is something you don't often get from undead entities.
Exactly. Sounds a little bit like they're kind of ghastly, ghostly magpies.
Yeah, sort of in that same way.
Well, and I think talking about that area of finding loot with them is the fact that they are bound to that 5-mile radius of their demise.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they can't pass. You could escape one, essentially, by running outside of its area if you know what that range is.
Yeah.
Sounds more like something you'd find out by accident versus actually knowing it.
Yeah. That's another interesting aspect of the monster is how they're just locked to this particular location where they finally met their end after their life where they, used their beauty to corrupt others. They're now bound to just live out their undeath in this same location without ever being able to find peace or rest.
And you did say that they are in Khariq.
Yeah. Due to a situation where there were some elves which actually betrayed Talos. Once they were discovered, they fled from his city into the Bragadian Mountains, where they eventually passed away and became these banshees that now haunt that particular area.
Which makes crossing through that pass a dangerous thing.
It is. They just kind of prey on travelers there in that particular location. And it's a dangerous pass, but it is a very necessary pass at the same time for people that need to travel from Cordon Harbor to another particular location on the east side of the mountains.
And as you're building adventures and stuff like that, you can hear rumors of what's happening in the past.
Yeah.
And people disappearing or horrible visions in the woods and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice little hook there, if you will.
And speaking of hooks, I guess it's time to head over to the tavern and cover today's plot hook. What you say we head back and get some refreshment?
Sounds like a plan. I don't want to run into anybody out here.
Yeah, me neither. I prefer the company of those in the tavern.
Sounds good.
Well, there's no mournful wails in here.
I was getting a little chill out there. I wondered if something was sneaking up behind us.
Well, let's come on over here to the fire and pull up our ale and discuss today's plot hook.
All right.
What we got on the docket today?
So, as we mentioned in the intro, we are discussing what would happen if fiends started invading your town.
And this is an element which was pretty prevalent in the first campaign that we ran in Khariq. What we mentioned before as the planes were actually locked down away from the prime material plane due to these 7 runic structures. When those started being released, different entities actually were able to find their way into the world. And there was even a little bit of backlash, which allowed a little bit more access than normal as a result of what the High Council was actually doing in that particular campaign.
Yeah.
And y'all guys came across a small gnome village, the village of Rialt, where there was an invasion of demonic entities that had actually affected that particular town. The first thing that comes to mind with this particular plot hook for me is it's a plot hook which is very ripe for investigation and discovery. Because this is not something that happens normally.
Right.
This is something where your first thought of, as soon as a fight with demons are over, is, why did this happen?
Yeah.
And there's many different ways that it could have happened. You could have a powerful demonic lord which has made its way into the particular prime material plane and is corrupting the land around it and breaking the barrier between the abyss or the 9 hells and the prime material. You can have a nefarious cult summoning entities into the world. You could have the lines between the planes weakening through some sort of powerful magical artifact which your players can actually find and discover. And it gives a great opportunity for discovery, mystery, investigation, in addition to just some interesting combat encounters as you go through this narrative of discovering why this town you've come across or why your own town is suddenly being beset by fiends.
You could even have a situation that's similar to in our own world's belief of Halloween, where a alignment of planets or particular time of the year has weakened the bonds and things cross over that have started the rumors of these creatures that come out at particular times of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that, now that you mentioned that, that's something that's built into D&D with things like Fey crossings and stuff like that, where things appear like during a full moon or during certain times of year or something like that. And that would be an interesting take on why this particular thing happened. Is it's maybe some location in a crypt or the graveyard of a particular town that every winter solstice or every equinox or something, that something comes out at night at this particular location.
And it can even add a sense of urgency to your party if this being isn't put back in its plane by the time All Hallows Eve ends. It's trapped here with us, and we have to deal with it until next year, you know.
And if it is a powerful entity that is here, that's corrupting something, it can actually be a recurring threat because, and this is the case with all fiends, is whenever you kill them, they don't actually die if you kill them in the prime material plane. To actually slay them permanently, they have to be slain in their home plane, in the abyss, or in the nine hells. And if you have some sort of entity that you defeat on this particular equinox, he could just come back at the next equinox if you don't go into the nine hells, find him, and take care of him. And it can be an actual larger plot arc instead of just a simple session-long narrative hook as well.
Especially if your party has forgotten about this particular villain, or it's been long enough that you could say that they are returning, and out of the blue, this enemy reappears that everyone thought they defeated.
And there's great entities to do this with, whether it be, you know, naming a pit fiend or an entity like a Rakshasa or something like that, where you can have these really powerful fiendish entities which, you know, you can create a whole characterization of and create a really interesting storyline.
Yeah. And you mentioned how we encountered one of these situations in the village of Rialt. And those were more of a mass of beings versus an individual coming across, and they were very particular about stealing items. So it wasn't that people were dying or being attacked left and right. They were thieves that were coming in the night, and nobody recognized them or knew what they were from. And
exactly.
Wrapping back around to that investigation, we had to find them and find the source.
And in that particular situation, you had a time limit almost to get it done, because where they had started coming through and amassing and camping was blocking the water source for the village.
That's right. And everyone was going to be in danger of dying of dehydration or going somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. And this village was really in danger, even though they weren't actually attacking them to kill them. It was just an interesting little encounter, and there's all sorts of twists that you can do if you have this sort of plot hook in your story. Well, I think that just about does it for this episode of Plot Hooks. I'd like to thank Mike for hanging out again this week.
No problem. Always fun.
Yeah. And thanks for listening from me, Samuel, Mike, Matt, Steve, Dave, Zach, Becca, and podcast Pupper Ellie. We'll see you all again next week for another episode of Plot Hooks.